Americans are very uninformed about reality, what's really going on.
I hate you for voting for him, for not having an intelligence.
Americans who don't travel, who 80% don't have a passport, who are uneducated, are in their extraordinary naivete.
In the grander scheme of things, who cares if I lose a part of the movie because I hate the orange atrocity?
We f***ed up.
Nerdrotic.com.
Greetings, you over 1 million awakening wonders and the 40% who haven't subscribed yet. What a difference a day makes. On one particular November 5th in 2024, Hollywood and the greater entertainment industry did not have an awakening. What they did have was a realization that they can no longer lie to themselves or to you anymore. For 8 years now, woke Hollywood has seen themselves as the pop culture resistance. Not really sure how you rationalize raging for the machine as a resistance, but they found a way. Far be it from me to point out that Hollywood's based in California, and they have been in lockstep with damn near every corporation, which includes every power structure involved with entertainment and information, which has been in lockstep with the state. I mean, your guy has been in office the last 4 years. Hollywood literally had everything they wanted, and now they're left wondering what the hell happened. Since that long overdue crash of the woke market on that fateful November 5th, I expected some things to change with the obvious cultural shift, but now I'm starting to get whiplash. From Jeff Bezos wanting the Washington Post to be more balanced now, or Mark Zuckerberg and his apologies, or the LA Times wanting to be more balanced. I mean, what the hell's going on? Slow down. I can only take so many victory laps. We all know that's not true, so let's take another. Here are some fun headlines just from the last week and a half. Former Bond girl Gemma Arterton says female 007 would be too outrageous. Sometimes you just have to respect the tradition. An obvious common sense statement that shouldn't be controversial at all, although it would have been considered a hate crime 2 years ago on Jack Dorsey's Twitter, and it might still be in the UK right now. Or from The Telegraph, Hollywood's great unwokening has been unleashed. Or from Deadline, Disney pulls transgender storyline from Win or Lose Pixar series. What?
But wait! There's more!
And believe me, we'll get to that. And I can hear you asking, what could be crazier than Disney pulling a transgender story out of a kid's show? How about the New York Times calling out woke Hollywood? That's right, the New York Times is calling out woke Hollywood, and they use some talking points that you may find familiar. Is the awkward diversity era of Hollywood behind us? No, I'm not tired of winning. Hollywood has its eras, often apparent only in retrospect. Well, maybe for you and your lot in the corporate legacy media, but for a vast majority of the general audience, no, we noticed a long time ago. There I go, I'm not even one sentence in, and I want to enjoy this, so let's hear them out. Think back several years. Do you remember packed theaters giving Black Power salutes at screenings of Black Panther? No, I remember Wakanda Forever salutes. Do you remember when an all-female version of the Ghostbusters was treated as pioneering development? Do you remember when the writer of a Star Wars film named Gary Whitta described the Empire as a white supremacist human organization after Donald Trump's 2016 election? Has enough time now passed to say that this was all a bit strange? Strange isn't the word I'd use. Maybe deliberate? No, doesn't describe enough. Maybe counterintuitive? We're getting a little closer. Divisive? Yes. Subversive? Sure. Oh, I got it. Retarded. Looking back, you can see a period when identitarian politics were in cultural ascendancy. No, you only thought they were. And then the article lists the myriad of problems that led up to this disastrous era, which has thankfully ended, including but not limited to Harvey Weinstein and Me Too, Oscars So White, The Summer of Love. What it fails to mention is how much Hollywood rooted on The Summer of Love, or rooted on authoritarianism, or the real pandemic, incurable TDS. Hollywood vowed to change their ways and atone for the past, but what was particular to this Hollywood of the 2010s was the way that these politics fused with the industry's insatiable demand for sequels, spin-offs, and reboots, giving us a curious and mercenary new invention, the inclusive multi-million-dollar blockbuster, or the BIPOC buster, if you will. It's the same old thing, but with a bold and visionary new twist. fewer white guys. Oh good, the New York Times has now determined that it's completely safe to say an obvious statement like, diversity just means less white. Now the article tries to argue that this era, which is almost a decade long, is akin to a genre or a subgenre like action movies in the 80s or the Western. So does the New York Times consider propaganda a genre now? But the article does make a very good point. When you use current year messaging in, for example, Star Wars or Star Trek, you're taking something that's been around for decades, that was timeless, and dating it. Is that what watching Barbie might feel like in 10 years? Yes. The patriarchy feels like a clearly of-the-moment choice for a big bad. The tropes of the passing era are as familiar and as easily spotted as with older periods. There is, for one thing, the showy, self-satisfied gender swapping, as with the 2016 election year reboot of the Ghostbusters.
What did you say?
I know this is crazy, right? But before you think the New York Times has found common sense, they remembered the New York Times. The movie prompted enough openly misogynistic and racist backlash to make it look like as if it was a noble endeavor, as if Hollywood executives who got reactionaries frothing at the mouth must be accomplishing something important, even if all they did was tweak the balance of characters in a dusty franchise. Well, that's undeniable now, but an argument could be made, is Ghostbusters 2016 made it a dusty franchise? Then the article states Hollywood was right. The audiences were hungry for different stories. No, they're hungry for good ones, which, to be fair, in this current era when we occasionally get one that is different. Then there are the paper-thin diverse characters parachuted into major films, put front and center on every poster. I mean, except for shrinking Finn on the Force Awakens poster for China and covering up Chadwick Boseman's face on the Black Panther poster for China, or turning Halle Bailey blue on the Little Mermaid poster for China. But as the New York Times points out, these diverse actors are given curiously little to do as the plot unfolds. Brie Larson's Captain Marvel was set up as the most powerful superhero in the Marvel Universe, but ended up playing no decisive role in its most important films. And that was the last moment of clarity Disney Marvel had for a few years. While Captain Marvel's appearance in Endgame didn't affect the bottom line, it was certainly a precursor of things to come. And the rest was herstory. Captain Marvel was later joined by a black woman and a Muslim woman in the sequel The Marvels, in another series of firsts, but still a throwaway film. I wouldn't call a movie with an estimated budget of between $270 million and $378.5 million throwaway.
Black girl magic!
But I guess it's good that the New York Times and their ilk in the corporate dinosaur legacy media are starting to realize that Hollywood doesn't really care about your identity. They're just there to exploit it. Because it turns out there wasn't just a mandate on casting diverse actors. They also cast directors, producers, and writers. So is the corporate dinosaur legacy media having an awakening about this? Or are they full of shit? More on that later. Other films tried to correct the past, judging their original white male protagonists far more harshly than anyone in the audience did. At this point, I have to remind you once again that this is the New York Times, and they're absolutely right. And there are dozens of examples, including The Last Jedi, Indiana Jones, Star Trek, Doctor Who, but I like the one they bring up, James Bond. In the final James Bond film from Daniel Craig, No Time to Die, Bond has been replaced as Agent 007 by a black woman, played by Lasagna Lynch. Can you remember her name or her drink of choice? No, I can barely remember her face. He obsesses over girlfriends, dead and alive. He is unable to seduce. A much younger Ana de Armas laughs off the thought. By the end, you're just happy that this poor man, now totally out of time, has been put out of his misery. I think this is a good time to point out that if any of these talking points sound like they came from, for example, The Critical Drinker or Chris Gore at Film Thread, or hell, even yours truly, it's because they did. It seems that the New York Times is willing to admit that trying to appease the gods of modernity is the easiest way to date your film or TV show. The old Bond films are distinctly of their era, but they feel timeless. Why? Because they're fun. What's surprising is how quickly No Time to Die and James Bond, in its desperation to be modern, has become to feel dated. Listen, I'm not the kind of guy who says, I told you so, but cue Razor Fist.
Fuck you, I was right! Fuck you, I was right!
Now the New York Times wants to go back to the whole woke era of Hollywood being some crazy genre. Hollywood is no less dependent than before on its original lore. It's aliens and Star Wars and Missions Impossible, recycled over and over again to keep us entertained. This industry tried to update these formulas with new faces, but many of its efforts felt dutiful, insincere, too earnest, and self-satisfied. And I've got nothing snarky to say. I completely agree with that. Say what you want about the flaws of Schwarzenegger's or Sergio Leone's oeuvres. Like what? They're masterpieces? Listen, despite Schwarzenegger saying screw your freedom, and screw him, by the way, don't you dare compare 80s action films and Sergio Leone's westerns to fucking woke Hollywood. Anyway, back to the New York Times. Despite making a very bad analogy, they are leading to a good point. But they have survived changing times because they are fun. Something the PC blockbuster rarely had going for it. Again, does any of this sound familiar? It's conceivable that the close of this era will involve Hollywood's backsliding away from any inclusion in films. That Shang-Chi was the last Asian hero, by the way, Simu Liu is not a movie star, and that we will return to Tom Cruise flying in to save the day. First off, it's not too late to recast Simu Liu, who is 1,000 times worse than Brie Larson. And second, this brings us to the takeaway line from this entire article, a rare moment of authenticity from the New York Times. At least we no longer have to pretend to like something because it has the right politics, or because the people most vocally against it are Nazis. New York Times and everybody else in the dinosaur legacy media, thank you for your honesty, I guess, but you can't call this an awakening when you just admitted you've been full of shit the entire time. And by the way, we all knew it. Man, they're having a tough time and I'm here for it, and it doesn't end there. From the Telegraph, Hollywood's great unwokening has been unleashed.
We're in a different era. Get over it. Whoa!
The last time the U.S. elected a certain Ron Sealed, what the hell's that? Is that some sort of British thing? The last time the U.S. elected Donald Trump, Hollywood overtly sided against him, styling itself as the pop culture wing of the resistance. I think it would be prudent to point out that there are still people to this very day who claim this didn't happen. A fat lot of good it did. Popular studio franchises grew shrill and hectoring, and the publicity tours to promote them even more so, giving the populace an easily mockable enemy against which to rally. Yes, it was low-hanging fruit and it was delicious. As for audiences in Europe and elsewhere, we found ourselves caught in the middle of a national domestic in which ideological point scoring took precedence no matter how witless or cheap. And here's the best bit. Loath as I am to give the W word an airing, there's no avoiding it. 2024 was the year in which Hollywood began to move to its post-woke era. Have you had enough winning yet? No? Let's continue. From Vanity Fair, Hollywood's DEI programs have begun to die. How hard did the industry really try? I knew not to expect much, says one TV creator, but it's still pretty disheartening when even the facade totally falls away. Not to everyone. And that's where the goalposts are moving, by the way, that Hollywood didn't try hard enough, which is utter horseshit. But here's the good bit. I've heard people in Hollywood are very cautious about potential lawsuits that could arise from perceived quota systems. There are even some concerns about people's titles having equity in them. And I think you should be concerned because it turns out you can't fight discrimination with discrimination. But I've saved the best for last from the Hollywood Reporter. Disney pulls transgender storyline from Pixar's Win or Lose streaming series exclusive. What is happening? A spokesperson for Disney confirmed that the story arc was removed and provided the following statement to the Hollywood Reporter. When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their own terms and timeline. A very common sense and obvious statement from Disney that they should have probably run with a few years ago. Let me follow this up with an obvious statement of my own. What the hell was that storyline doing in a kid's show in the first place? And there's one more from the Hollywood Reporter again, Hollywood's biggest winners and losers of 2024. And we're just gonna focus on one loser, Disney Star Wars. Another Star Wars film pushed, another Star Wars trilogy announced. Does anybody think these announcements are real and not a money laundering scheme? Another Star Wars series that flopped. This one, $180 million. No, actually, the budget for The Acolyte was $230 million. And it generated massive controversy and fan division, some of which was super toxic, but also, how many times could Disney blame its audience for not liking what it makes? Apologies for all the reminders, but I do think it's necessary to point out that this is the Hollywood Reporter. The franchise's new kids show, Skeleton Crew, is getting good reviews for the first 2 episodes, so at least that's something. Too bad nobody's watching it. Part of the blowback against Lucasfilm boss Kathleen Kennedy is just people being jealous. Who doesn't want to be able to have projects repeatedly stumble and still keep one of Hollywood's top jobs? The rest of us can only dream of failing so successfully. Holy shit. I think Steve Bannon has infiltrated The Hollywood Reporter. Shots fired at Kathleen Kennedy. Hey, in her defense, you really have to try to fail this much. But to be fair, I can't put it all on the old girl because there is one other person out there trying to steal her crown of destruction. No, it's not Jar Jar Abrams. No, it's not Rianne Johnson. It's Mark Hamill, who seems to be having a really tough time right now.
I do feel it's an obligation. And who cares about your career? People say, oh, well, it's hurting your career because you have to appeal to the whole country, not just half the country or 45% or whatever the MAGA crowd is. In the grander scheme of things, who cares if I lose a part in the movie because I hate the orange atrocity?
Ultimately, I think former head of Amazon Prime, Roy Price, sums it up perfectly. Woke is the new disco, and nowhere is this cultural shift more evident than in the parallel decline of Hollywood and the collapse of Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Both share a fatal flaw, an insistence on catering to an ideological bubble while alienating vast swaths of the potential audience. For Hollywood, this miscalculation carries existential implications. It's time to move on. We've definitely reached a saturation point, so the question has to be asked, is Hollywood willing to move on from woke Hollywood? Unlikely, but they better because the audience already has. Now you're going to see a lot of people in the entertainment industry try to metaphorically delete their history and state they were never down with this woke stuff or cancel culture or demonizing half the country, and you're not going to get away with it that easy. Hollywood, you get what you fucking deserve, and it was well earned. Maybe in the distant future there'll be time for grace.
But it is not this day! This day we fight!
Nerdrotic.com.
If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
We're gonna stop woke. Woke is bullshit.